Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Capital G here with Depala Pilot Exemplar. And talk about a commander that's received a surprising amount of support in recent years. The past year and a bit, really, ever since Throne of Eldraine. As before, she's a Dwarf commander, she's also a vehicle commander, and there wasn't really much to choose from when she first came out in the original Kaladesh block. But since then, she's actually received a bunch of new toys. And with Strixhaven coming out soon, with the Forgotten Realms coming up later this year, she'll have plenty more to play with. So let us talk about Depala herself. A white, a red, and a 1 for this Boros Commander, 3/3. Other dwarves we control get +1/+1. Each vehicle we control gets +1/+1 as long as it's a creature. And whenever Depala becomes tapped, we can pay X. If we do, reveal the top X cards of our library and put all dwarf and vehicle cards from among them into our hand. And put the rest of the bottom of our library in a random order. So, a Boros Commander for dwarves that can draw us cards. Okay, so let's see what this deck looks like in March of 2021. And this would be interesting to come back to, say, this time next year and see if she has grown any further. We'll start with our artifacts. Arcane Signet, of course, for the ramp. A Bearded Axe. Kaldheim seems to want us to go with equipment and vehicles for our dwarves, for whatever reason. Can't settle on one, so figured I'd throw the Bearded Axe in here. Pretty efficient to equip, and gives the equipped creature +1/+1 for each dwarf, equipment, and vehicle we control. Not bad. Boros Locket. 3 mana for a mana rock that can tap for our colors. We can pay 4 mana in any combination of red or white to sacrifice the locket and draw 2 cards. Now, mana rocks at 3 mana are a little out of flavor these days, but being in Boros, having that rock that we can trade in for some cards seems like it's still good to me. Boros Signet, of course, at 2 mana rock will always be good, as is Cold Steel Heart. Yes, this enters the battlefield tapped, but we can choose whether or not it taps for red or white or any other color if you have some reason to choose a different color. And this taps to add 1 mana of the chosen color. Note that it is a snow artifact, so this does in fact tap for snow mana. Cultivator's Caravan, again with the 3 mana rocks. However, it's also a vehicle that we can crew with 3 power worth of creatures. So crew, of course, is tap any number of creatures as long as their power is 3 or greater, their total power. Cultivator's Caravan becomes a 5/5 until end of turn. Sweet. Demolition Stomper. A much higher crew cost. We're looking for 5 power worth of creatures, but once this turns sideways, our opponents can't block it with creatures of power 2 or less. So they have to give up something a little more substantial if they want to stop this from hitting their face. Fire Diamond gives us a red, Iron Tread Crusher. 4 mana 6/6, crew 3. And 3 is a good number, by the way, because Depala, of course, being a 3 power creature, can crew these all on her own and can activate her ability to draw more cards. Marble Diamond, the Mobile Garrison. 3 mana 3/4 that can untap another artifact or creature we control when this swings. The Paralian 2. Yes, it's 8 mana for this 5/5. Well, potential 5/5. We need 4 power worth of creatures to crew it. Has Flying First Strike Vigilance. And this creates angel tokens with Flying and Vigilance that are attacking. So we crew it, we attack, we get 2 angels. They're already attacking. All of a sudden we're attacking for 13. In the following turn, the longer this stays in play, the longer the tokens stay in play, the more power we get on board. Peace Walker Colossus. 3 mana for a vehicle that can be 6/6. We need 4 power worth of creatures to crew it. However, this ability of being able to pay a white and 1 to have any other vehicle we control become an artifact creature until end of turn. Sweet, crew with mana instead of creatures. Raider's Carve, one of the newest vehicles, 3 mana for this 4/4, and when this attacks, we get to look at the top card of our library, and if it's a land, put it onto the battlefield tab. So this could help us ramp. Again, crew 3, which means Depala can activate it all on her own. Sky Sovereign, one of the best vehicles, 6/5 flying. When this enters the battlefield or attacks, deal 3 damage to a creature or a planeswalker, and it's very easy to crew. Looter Scooter. This has destroyed many a format in its time. 2 mana for this vehicle that can be a 3/3 with flying, and whenever it attacks or blocks, we may draw and discard a card. And with a crew cost of only 1, super easy to crew this. Soul Ring, of course, for the ramps. Sunforger. We're running quite the Sunforger package in this deck. 3 mana to cast, 3 to equip. Equip creature gets +4/0. Turn one of our creatures into an offensive powerhouse. We can also pay a white and a red and unattached Sunforger from a creature that it is attached to go get one of our red or white instants with mana cost 4 or less. Spoiler alert. We can choose from all of the instants or instants that have been picked for this deck and cast it for free. Talisman of Conviction, excellent mana rock. Throne of the God Pharaoh, 2 mana legendary artifact, and at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. Now, fun fact about crewing vehicles. Let's go back to our... Actually, since our next card here is the Weatherlight, let's look at it. So 4 mana for a 4/5 vehicle with flying. Crew cost of 3, and whenever this deals combat damage to a player. Look at the top 5 cards of our library. Reveal a historic card, which can be an artifact, a legendary card, or a saga card. Put in our hand. Sweet. Now, 3 is the minimum cost to crew a vehicle. However, if we happen to have, say, 15 power worth of creatures, we can tap it all to crew the one vehicle. So let's say that makes 4 or 5 dwarves. Well, guess what? All of a sudden they're all tapped. At the beginning of our end step, all of our opponents will lose that much life. Drugger Hedgemage going into our creatures. This 3 mana creature is pretty cool, especially if we have 2 or more mountains and or 2 or more plains when it enters the battlefield, because if we have 2 or more mountains, we can destroy an artifact. If we control 2 or more plains, we can destroy an enchantment. That's very efficient for a 3 mana creature. Running the Dwarven Blast Miner and the Dwarven Miner. Both of these can have the activated ability of 3 tap, destroy a non-basic land. Make things like Maze of If or Guy's Cradle or things like that disappear. Dwarven Recruiter. A must if you're running Depala. You must have this card. 3 mana for a 2/2. When this comes into play, search your library for any number of dwarves. Reveal those cards, shuffle the rest of your library, put those dwarves on top in any order. And of course the follow-up is you tap Depala or attack with Depala and pay X and draw those dwarves immediately into your hand. Gold Maw Champion. A bit of a draft chaff piece coming from Kaldheim here, but 3 mana for a 2/3. Can crew some of our vehicles. Has Boast. So instead of crewing a vehicle, this can swing, and we can pay a white and 1 and tap down a creature. Obviously, we can only do this once each turn, but sometimes just taking away with 1 key blocker lets everything else get through. Running Halvar, God of Battle. Although we're not really running him for his god side, as good as this card is, he's here for Sword of the Realms. White and 1 for this legendary artifact. Equip creature gets +2/0 and has vigilance. Sweet. Equip is only 2 mana. Sweet. And whenever equipped creature dies, return it to its owner's hand. Sweet. 3 for 3. That's why it's here. Jorkadeen the Prevailer. For running more than enough artifacts, should be pretty easy to have at least 3 on the battlefield. Because if we do, our whole team gets +3/+0. Jorkadeen himself also has first strike, making him an amazing attacker. He's not a dwarf though. That's really the only downside. He is not a dwarf. But he synergizes with the artifact side of the deck. Cole the Forge Master. Whenever the non-token creature you control dies, if it was enchanted or equipped, return it to its owner's hand. Admittedly, we only have the 3 pieces of equipment in the deck. That's alright. Because you can still protect a couple of our dwarves this way. Creature tokens you control that are enchanted or equipped get +1/+1. We don't have a lot of tokens, but there are ways. Magda, Brazen Outlaw. Very popular mono red commander in her own right. Legendary Dwarf Berserker, 2 mana for 2/1. Other dwarves we control get +1/+0. And whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, create a treasure. Again, regardless of the actual crew cost of our vehicles, we can tap as many dwarves as we want to crew those vehicles, therefore creating a whole bunch of treasure. And sacrifice 5 treasures, search your library for an artifact or a dragon card, put it onto the battlefield. So hey, that's actually a way to cheat out the Paralian too. Excellent synergy here. Mirror Entity. It doesn't look like a dwarf, but it's a dwarf. And we can pay X and make our whole team huge. I actually won a game with this the other night on Spell Table. So the power is real on this one. Rebec, Architect of Ascension. Again, running a bunch of artifacts. So artifacts we control have protection from each converted mana cost amongst artifacts we control. So we have some 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, 8s. So it'll be, the more artifacts we have in play with Rebec, the harder it is to get rid of them. And also, once those artifacts are crewed, especially when our vehicles get crewed, it'll be very difficult for our opponents to be able to block them. Or, if they're attacking us, we can crew the vehicle and block safely as long as Rebec remains on the battlefield. Restoration Specialist. 2 mana for this 2/1 dwarf. Artificer. We can pay a white and sacrifice it, return an artifact and an enchantment card from our graveyard to our hand. Running the full slate of 7 dwarves. A friendly reminder that the rules on the card override the rules of the game. Therefore, we can have up to 7 copies of 7 dwarves in the deck. And honestly, you're going to run 7 copies of 7 dwarves. And it's not uncommon for players to replace the art with, say, images from one of their favorite childhood Disney movies. Just saying. Sram, Senior Artificer. 2 mana for a 2/2 dwarf. Whenever we cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle, draw a card. No auras in the deck, spoiler alert, but we do have the equipment, we do have the vehicle, so we could get some card advantage. It's also a dwarf, so it synergizes just fine. Torian Mauler, again, does not look like a dwarf, but it's a dwarf. And it's a dwarf that can get humongous, especially as our opponents cast more and more spells. This gets more and more +1/+1 counters. Running Tesher, Ancestor's Apostle here. One of my favorite commanders in mono white. Probably the best mono white commander. But running in the 99 here, even though Tesher is not a dwarf, the deck does run a lot of historic spells, and it does run a lot of creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less. Therefore, Tesher. Toolcraft Exemplar. 1 white, 1/1, but as long as we control an artifact, this gets +2/+1 until end of turn, at the beginning of combat. If we control 3 more artifacts, it also gains first strike. So this 1 mana can easily be a 3/2 first strike. And even if it's not attacking, it's definitely crewing. Speaking of definitely crewing, Veteran Motorist. A white and a red, and this is good even if you're not running vehicles. Because this Dwarf pilot, for starters, is a Dwarf. When it enters the battlefield, scry 2. That's pretty sweet in Boros. And whenever a Veteran Motorist crews a vehicle, that vehicle gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Also, 3 power. Everything we want. War Chanter Scald. 3 mana for this 2/3, and whenever this becomes tapped, if it's enchanted or equipped, we get a 2/1 red Dwarf Berserker token. Sweet. Try and get our favorite equipment target if we manage to get him out with a piece of equipment early. We don't run a lot of equipment, but if we manage to connect with that, we can start going wide. Running 2 enchantments, both sagas. Forging the Tyrite Sword. Chapters 1 and 2 lets us create a treasure token. Great for ramping. And then Chapter 3 is we can search for Halvar, God of Battle, or an equipment, reveal it, put it into our hand. So yeah, Chapters 1, Chapter 2 gives us treasure. Chapter 3 lets us ramp for one of our equipment, basically. Showdown of the Scalds also gives us some card advantage. 4 mana for this one. Chapter 1. Exile the top 4 cards of our library. Until the end of our next turn, we may play those cards. Chapters 2 and 3 say that whenever we cast a spell, we can put a 1/1 counter on a creature we control. I think it's pretty sneaky to, you know, crew one of your vehicles and put the 1/1 counters on the vehicles. Just saying, they get to keep them a little longer than most other creatures would. Over to our instants, and we have quite the package here. All our instants can be tutored out using the Sunforger, including a Chrome as well. And part in the water. It's getting a little humid in the house, and it's making my mouth a little clicky, shall we say. So Chrome as well, 4 mana for this instance. Choose one, although if we control our commander, we can choose both modes. Mode 1 is creatures we control gain flying, vigilance, and double strike until end of turn. Devastating. Mode 2 is creatures we control gain lifelink, indestructible, and protection from all colors until end of turn. Save our board. Absolutely, why not? Armed and Armored. This 2 mana instant, vehicles you control become artifact creatures until end of turn. Choose a Dwarf, attach any number of equipment you control to it. This can do a lot of work depending on the board state. Boros Charm, of course. All 3 modes are excellent. 4 damage to a player or planeswalker. We can give our permanents indestructible until the end of turn, or we can give a creature double strike until the end of turn. All 3 of these are super effective. Chaos Warp, premier targeted removal. The owner of target permanents shuffles it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent, put it onto the battlefield. Crib Swap. It's a tribal instant shapeshifter, which means it's a dwarf. We can actually get this with Depala's ability. And when we cast it, 3 mana to cast it, exile target creature, its controller creates a 1/1 colorless shapeshifter token with changeling. Deflecting Swat. Why not? We want to defend our commander. If we can't cast it for free from our hand, we'll cast it for free from the Sunforger. Choose new targets for target spell or ability. Flawless Maneuver. Creatures you control gain indestructible, and we could cast this for free if we have our commander on the battlefield. Generous Gift. Destroys any permanent. Its controller gets a 3/3 elephant. Running Path to Exile. Exiles a creature, they get a basic. Swords to Plowshares. Exile a creature, and its controller gains life. Tybalt's Trickery. How about some interesting little counter magic here. 2 mana, counter a spell. Then we choose 1, 2, or 3 at random. Our opponent mills that many cards. Then exiles cards from the top of the library until they hit a non-land with a different name. They may cast that card without paying its mana cost. So it's one of these high-risk counter spells. Chances are, if we're going to use this on something, it's got to be bad for us. So counter it and turn it and hopefully into, say, a mana rock or something. Wear and Tear. For 2 mana, we can cast the red side, destroy target artifact. For 1 white mana, we can destroy target enchantment. This one has Fuse, so we can actually cast both sides of the card in one go. Moving on to lands, 34 of them, including the Alpine Meadow. It's a snow land that taps for both our colors. The Axguard Armory. This enters the battlefield tapped. It can tap for 1 white mana, or we can pay this cost, 1 red, red, white, and sacrifice the armory to search for an aura or equipment and put it into our hand. So another way to tutor out our key equipment. Battlefield Forge, one of the best pain lands. Clifftop Retreat enters the battlefield tapped unless we control a mountain or plains, and taps for both our colors. Command Tower, of course. Evolving Wilds is here. Fabled Passage. Yeah, running the Evolving Wilds, Fabled Passage, and Terramorphic Expanse, as we're running mostly basics, and we do have cards that want our basics in play. Faceless Haven. A Snowland taps for a colorless mana, and we can pay 3 snow to have this turn into a 4/3 creature with Vigilance, and with all creature types until end of turn. Yeah, so we are actually in fact running snow basics just to have this as a sort of backup creature if we get wiped, but we still have our vehicles. It's a pretty good fit. So much so that I'm actually considering for my Massacre Girl deck, I've built Massacre Girl vehicles, and I'm considering this strategy as well for that build. Inspiring Vantage. Enters the battlefield tapped unless we control 2 or fewer other lands, and can tap for either of our colors. Inventor's Fair. We have a bunch of artifacts, so this could gain us some life. This could tutor out an artifact for us. Running the Pathway, of course. Needle Verge Pathway can tap for red, or we can choose to play it as Pillar Verge Pathway to get the white. Path of Ancestry, Dwarf Tribal, so let's get some scry action going. The Sacred Foundry, of course. Shimmer Drift Veil, it's a snowland, we can choose whatever color we may be missing. 8 snow-covered mountains, 7 snow-covered plains, 1 spectator seating. Running the Spire of Industry. We're running more than enough artifacts that we can either tap this for the colorless, or we can pay a life and get a mana of any color as long as we control an artifact. Sunhome. Target creature gains double strike off of a land. Sure thing. There's the aforementioned Terramorphic Expanse. Tyrite Sanctum. This is a very slow way to protect our commander, because we can turn our commander into a god with a 1/1 counter, and then eventually put an indestructible counter on target god. We do have our shapeshifter friends as well that may benefit from being indestructible. 5 sorceries, including the Citywide Bust. Destroy all creatures with toughness 4 or greater. Dwarven Reinforcements. It's a 4 mana sorcery that creates 2/2/1 Dwarf Berserker tokens. Of course, we can foretell it for a red and 1, and then we can foretell it for 2 generic, and then later cast it for a red and 1. Search for Glory. This lets us go get a snow permanent, a legendary, or a saga card, put into our hand. We also gain a life for each snow mana spent to cast the spell, so this could give us a couple points of life if we need it. Shatter Skull Smashing. Red, red, X to deal X damage divided as we choose amongst up to 2 creatures or planeswalkers. If X is 6 or more, deal twice X damage divided as we choose instead. Sweet. You can also play it as Shatterskull the Hammer Pass, which is a land that taps for a red. It would normally come into play tapped, but we can pay 3 life to get around that drawback. Tundra Fumarole is our last sorcery of the day, red, red, and 1 for this snow sorcery. Deal 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and add a colorless for each no mana spent to cast the spell. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. The only thing I'm not sure of is if the... Gotta check the Oracle text on this one. Do not know if the mana produced by this spell is considered snow mana or not. It is a snow sorcery. So I feel like the answer is yes, but I would take a moment to double check this before your game if you play with this card. And on that note, Depala, Pilot Exemplar. And that's where we're at now. Imagine how much more progress we can make on this build. Again, once we have Strixhaven, which is going to have a lot of support for this color combination. And once we have the Forgotten Realms, which, well, Dwarf is one of the classic races in Dungeons & Dragons, so of course we're going to get more dwarves. Let's see where we end up going with this. On that note, I think I'm going to be taking a break from deck text. We're going to wait to see what Strixhaven gives us, so I'm going to disappear for a little bit. Might do a filler video at some point, don't know yet. But until next time, whenever that may be, stay safe and we'll see you again.